Neighbors, happy Friday. So hopefully you're in the right webinar. We're going to talk about the retroactive funding swaps, the short-term solution that has been made available to campus this week. My name is Nicole Shevitt, and I am with Connect Carolina Change Management, and I'm joined by Andy Johns, who is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research. So wanted to just let you know we are going to take questions at the end, but you can submit questions at any point during the talk. So the chat window is on. Feel free, as things pop in your mind, to go ahead and submit those questions. So as you may or may not know, we have a new tool that's going to allow us to do retro funding swaps on payroll in Connect Carolina. But before we get into talking about that tool and showing you how it works, I'm going to give you some background about what we're dealing with. So we've had a series of issues that have affected our personnel expenses, how they were encumbered and how they were distributed. And so the tool that we were to correct those issues was not working correctly. So the project team, and by that we mean the folks who work on Connect Carolina, have partnered with Andy's group over in the Office of Research Information Systems to give us a solution to correct those issues. So let's talk about what those issues are and make sure that we are all on the same page, which is always a good place to be. So the first thing is around distributions. So in some cases, we did have labor distributions that were distributed inaccurately on the GL. So you were planning to pay them one way, and as I've heard it termed, a gift from PeopleSoft took those distributions and decided to put them somewhere else. Aren't we thankful for that? And so it affected personnel distributions from December through February. So overall, there were about 11% on the high end, or 11% of biweekly folks that were affected, and 19% of our monthly folks who were affected by this problem. With encumbrances, so the application that calculated our labor encumbrances and did the retros it says it doesn't meet our needs. It just didn't work. All right. So there was a bug in the EPAR that was causing inaccurate encumbrances. The encumbrances for our hourly temps and students was working on an annual basis, and we know that's not how we pay them. So it was over encumbering those folks. It ignored job end dates. You know, it's in there. Let's pay attention to the information. And unfortunately, the tool was not doing that. Suspense. So you guys have heard more about suspense than you want to in the last many months, I'm sure. For grants, spending on multi-year grants is restricted until the sponsor says it's okay to continue. And that's great because that improves our compliance. It makes sure that we're kind of crossing our T's and dotting our I's when we're dealing with the feds, because we don't want anybody wearing pinstripes or orange. Doesn't look good. We want to make sure we're covering all of our bases well. But what that did was it shifted costs more than we expected it to suspense. And so it really has caused a lot of problems, especially around grants. There's another issue on suspense where we had folks, primarily students and hourly temps, who, because of low FTE and low budget in the department budget table, were hitting suspense. Now that has been corrected. So there was a fix put in last weekend that moved those employees who had hit suspense. Now this is just for employees who hit suspense due to low FTE or low budget. For those employees, a fix was implemented last weekend, moving those people off of suspense onto the correct funding sources. So you can see that information right now in HR. So if you go into InfoPort, you should be able to see that on the payroll tab or the HR funding report. That information has not been pushed to the GL. So when I say that, what I mean is that you can't look in finance and see that information yet. They're working to get that pushed through and should have that hitting the finance side of things by the end of this month. But the bottom line on both of these issues is that we had a lot of personnel costs that were shifted to suspense when they didn't really need to be. Retros. So moving personnel off of suspense was a huge problem because the retro funding swap form, the EPAR form that we have, was not working for payrolls ran in Connect Carolina. So basically anything after 10-1, it just would not work. We couldn't do retros on retros for payroll that was run in FRS. So we just kind of we're in a world of hurt around retros, I think it's fair to say. And so again, that's one of the issues that we're addressing in this new tool that we have. So the team, and again, by the team, we're talking about the folks who work on Connect Carolina day in and day out, and we're talking about the folks from Office of Research Information Systems, Andy's team. They got together and really said, you know, we've got to tackle this effort in a bunch of different ways. So they took a multi-pronged approach. So we've got some short-term solutions we want you to know about. So first of all, the actual distributions have been corrected. So that 11% of biweekly and 19% of monthly folks, or that might be vice versa, that has been corrected. So that was taken care of this past weekend. You can see those corrections now in InfoPort. They are there for you to see. Budget checking has been stopped on EPAR forms, and also encumbrances have been stopped on EPAR. So when you submit EPAR forms now, you won't get budget errors, and we just are no longer creating encumbrances off of that form. So the project end date on 630 projects, and those are the projects that have expanded authority. Okay, so projects designated with expanded authority. Those projects have had their project end date extended, but also the end date on budgets has been extended to 75 days past the project end date to allow for project closeout. So that's really, we're looking at, in that case, helping people to take care of their non-personnel closeout. And that's also complete. The retro funding swap tool, you guys have probably already been in there kind of getting your fingers all nice and pruny, spending lots of time doing retros. That was made available to us on the 18th. So today I think is the 19th or the 20th. So 2 days ago, that's been made available to campus, and that's what we're talking about today. So a next step for us is to remove salary encumbrances for the rest of the fiscal year, and that is going to happen at the end of March. And then a report will be provided to show the salary projections for those encumbrances. So we can take those encumbrances out, but that doesn't mean they don't exist, that we don't have them. And so a tool is going to be provided that will give us those encumbrances through the end of the fiscal year, and it will be based on the most recent payroll. And both of those things are going to be available to us by the end of this month. So long-term solutions. So long-term, we need to rebuild the personnel encumbrance feature in Connect Carolina. It's not working. The tool that we have now, our short-term tool, is great. It's going to help us get really far from where we are right now, help us get things cleaned up. But and when you get in there, you're going to appreciate how it works, but you'll also understand why it's a short-term tool and not a long-term tool. There's just more that we need in a campus as complex as we are. And we expect to have that tool rebuilt in fall of 2015. Connect Carolina will be reconfigured to recognize and control expenditures based on the active budget period and status instead of the project end date, okay? And so that also, they're looking at fall of 2015 to have that out. So that will help all of you who are struggling with your contracts and grants. So again, fall of 2015. And again, we're saying fall of, I wish we could say tomorrow, but these are huge changes, and these changes are going to require months of analysis and design. We're going to need to test these things up one side and down the other. I mean, we want to make sure that when it is implemented that it works and that we do not have any unintended consequences. And, we've all kind of struggled through in the last few months with the problems that we have, so I think we can appreciate being really judicious and kind of making sure that this thing is right versus pushing out, a tool immediately. So let's talk about the short-term solution, which is the tool that Andy's folks have given us. So you're going to go now into Connect Carolina, and on the HR Work Center, you want to look for the retro funding swap option. So this option, and again, it's go in Connect Carolina, and on the left side of the screen, you'll choose HR Work Center. And this lets you do retroactive funding swaps for payrolls that have been run in Connect Carolina. So this is not for converted data. This is not for something going forward. You need to change somebody's payroll for 3/1 and their monthly. Well, we haven't paid them yet. So you can still do that using the EPAR funding swap form. This tool is not for our secured schools or divisions, so we're talking in that case athletics, the budget office, provost's office, and the chancellor's office. So those folks will not be able to use this tool. People paid on their sources will not be able to use this tool. Now here's a really important thing to note. Anyone who has access to the funding swap form will automatically have access to this new option. So nobody needs to create any paperwork to get someone access unless they don't currently have access to the funding swap form, okay? So that is good news. The tool is not built in Connect Carolina, so it's going to look a little bit different. It's going to look a good bit different than Connect Carolina, but it may look familiar to a lot of you who are used to Ramsey's, okay, because it's kind of built on that same structure. So it will look familiar to some of you for sure. Now, when you need to do a retro, you're going to have to do that by person, by pay period, okay? So you would choose the person, so let's say you want to do a retro on me, you want to choose Nicole Shevitt, and if you want to change my biweekly 14, then you would use that tool, and the tool will show you my funding sources for that particular biweekly, okay? You're only going to see salary. It's not going to show you benefits or any other distributions. It's just going to show you salary. Fringe and taxes and other deductions will be calculated behind the scenes, all right? If you are in the School of Medicine and you deal with clinical faculty, it's important to know that the tool does not include clinical comp, okay? So that decision was made by the School of Medicine. So don't be thrown off by that if you get in there and clinical comp is not listed. Doesn't mean they didn't receive it, just means it's not included in the tool. So the changes that are made in the tool are going to go straight into the general ledger. Okay, so what that means is that it's going to hit your dollars. So in the accounting period that retro is approved, it'll get posted, and you will be able to see that on the Transactions tab in InfoPort. But because that tool is going straight into the GL, right now it is not going to update the HR side. So any retros that are done in this new retro tool, you will see in finance, but they will not be in HR. So, understanding that that's going to cause some, difficulty and having to look in multiple places for things. But right now, that payroll in Connect Carolina, the HR side, will not have those updates. Now, all of this information is being collected, and the plan is to put that in HR. So at some point down the road, after they're working on this long-term solution, they're doing all the testing, they do plan to take all these retros that are hitting finance and to also bring that into HR. So, so our HR side really mirrors our finance side for our payroll. All right, so let's talk about how this tool works. So can you increase someone's funding with the tool? You know the answer to this, no. So the funding swap form, just like on the funding swap form, this has to net zero. So you cannot give yourself a raise or anybody else. And you can't decrease their total funding. So you can't give them a pay cut either, even if they deserve it. Right, we can't do that. So net zero. Can you do more than one retro for a person at a time? And yes, you can, but it's important to remember it's per person per pay period. So if you need to change 3 months on an EPA employee, then that's going to require 3 retros. Let's say you're changing December, January, and February. That requires 3 retros, one for December, January, and February, and they can be submitted all at the same time. But you can't do another one on December until that one has completed, all right? So that's important to know. How many lines of funding can a person have? Thankfully, there is no limit, so this is good. We are not hearkening back to the days of yore where we could only do 20 salary sources on somebody. We don't have that issue, so it's unlimited. Yes, you're welcome, School of Medicine, with all your salary sources out there. Does the tool check my chart field? Does it budget check? So the tool is going to validate the chart field. So it's going to make sure that you're using the appropriate combination of fund, source, and so forth. Okay, so it's doing that, what we call a combo edit. It does do a budget check, but it won't fail for budget checking. So you'll get if it should fail, in kind of in the real world, if it would fail, then it would, instead it's going to give you a warning message so that you know that budget would need to be moved. But this is going to be allowed to proceed so that we can get these things cleaned up, okay? All right, so let's talk about when you use what, because sometimes you're going to need to use the funding swap form. Sometimes you need to use the retro tool. Sometimes you need to do a help ticket. So when do you do what? So if you need to do a retro on payroll run in Connect Carolina, you're going to use the new retro tool. All right. If you are doing a retro on payroll in Connect Carolina and you've already done a retro on the information, you're also going to use this new retro tool. I should have changed that to say retro tool instead of funding sources option. But that's what I'm talking about, the new tool in those cases. If you are doing a retro on converted payroll information, that needs to be done on a funding swap form, okay, the funding swap EPAR form. If it's converted payroll information and you've already done a retro, if it's converted payroll information and it's non-regular salary, so longevity, overtime, fringe, shift differential, any of those kind of flavors that are not your regular earnings, and you need to do a retro on converted, or if the charges are from lump sum payments on converted payroll or vacant positions, in all of those cases, you need to put in a help ticket. And when you enter that help ticket, you have to attach the request form for retro journal entries. And you can find that form on the CC Info website, all right? So if it's converted and any one of these 4 bullets applies, then you need to put in a help ticket attaching the request form for the retro journals. Now, the exception to all of this is for employees, and I mentioned this earlier, in the Chancellor's Office, Provost's Office, Athletics, and General Administration. And for those folks, you will always have to put in a help ticket and attach the form. So even if you work in those offices, this tool can't be used for you. This tool is wide open to campus. There's not security in that tool around where people work, so y'all's information just isn't even in there. All right, so I want to take you through the screens and let you see what the tool looks like. Again, many of you have already been in the system and using it, but for those of you who are waiting till Monday, because if you're going to do this, you want to start fresh, not start in the middle of the week on a chore like this, you may be waiting till Monday. So let's talk about it. So again, you're going into Connect Carolina. You want to go to the HR Work Center, and you're going to choose the Retro Funding Swap Post 10-1 option. And it tells you right there that you use this when you are doing retros on payroll after October 1st. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So you click on that link, and it's going to pop up either a new tab or a new window, depends on whether you're using IE or Firefox or Chrome, what have you. And you will sign in with your Onion and your password, okay? So it's not single server sign-on the way we can go between Connect Carolina and Infoport and some other things. You will need to log in again with your Onion and password. When you log in, you're going to click on the Create Submission button. This is how you get a new retro started, Create Submission. You will select an employee, so click on the little magnifying glass, and this is where you can look up who you need to do the retro on. So you can search by last name, first name. If you have their PID, you can put the PID in. If you wanted to just kind of see a list of everybody in your department, you could go by department. But I think most of the time you're going to be looking up a particular person. If you see more than one option, you'll see it does display the middle name, and it also provides the department. So hopefully you can look at that and be able to select the correct person. So you'll click select beside the person who you want to see, and then what the system will show you is their name, their PID, and the department that they belong to. And that just lets you make sure that you pick the right person. Okay, because I mean, you guys know there are lots of people with the same names, and sometimes even in the same departments. So you want to look at that PID. All right. So once you've ensured that you have the right person, you're going to choose the pay period end date that you need to do the retro for. And you can see if you look at this list, these are kind of those pay periods that are available for retros. All right. So this is an SPA employee. You can tell looking at that. So you click your pay period, and in this case we're looking at pay period end date of November 30th, 2014. And the system shows you the funding sources for that person. So in this case, here is our funding for John Doe for the period November 30th, 2014. So he was paid on 5 different chart field streams. You choose the chart field stream that you need to make the adjustment for, and you'll click on Make Adjustment. And then what that does is it takes you to an Adjustment Details tab, and you can see it is taking that chart fill string and it puts it at the top of the window, and it shows you the original amount that was paid on that chart fill string. All right. You'll also see that same chart fill string in the bottom along with the other sources. The difference is that it's not editable. So if you look at that adjustment on the far right side, it's not an open field because you're making the adjustment to that at the top of the page, but it's included in the list so that you do have a comprehensive view. All right. Now, to make the adjustment, when you've selected the chart fill string that you need to correct, you're going to reduce the amount. All right, so instead of spending $4,303, we want to put $3,803 on this chart fill string. So we're adjusting, we're taking $500 off, and we are then adding with positive amounts the amount to the other chart fields that that $500 needs to be distributed. All right. Now, should it be that you need to add a brand new chart field string, you'll click on the Add Line link, which is in the bottom left corner of your screen. You'll click that, and then it'll give you the fields that you need to enter your new chart field string. And again, you would add in, the $500 and so forth that you need to make the change for. Now, before you're able to submit, you do have to select a reason for the adjustment. I think there are about 14 reasons here. So this information is being looked at by OSR because we have to report back to our sponsors when things are beyond 90 days and we're making changes. We've got to let them know why we're doing this. Okay. So you will need to select a reason here, and if none of these really apply and it has to be other, then you have to make sure that you include some detail, and there is a place for you to add some notes, and you'll want to make sure you include detail so that OSR can look at this and understand why this retro is being made. All right. Then there are guidelines. We have a slide about that, but there's some guidelines that OSR has provided for that as well. So you choose your reason. You're going to make sure that in the bottom right corner that you are netting zero, because remember, we can't give a raise or pay cuts. We're just swapping funding. All right, so once it's at zero, you'll click Save, and then that will submit it for approval. The thing to know about the approvals, much like the way we all still have access on the funding swap form, we have access to this system if we have access to the funding swap, the approval process is the same. So whatever approvals folks have had to follow to date on the funding swap for your department, those same approvals will be necessary for the retro tool. The difference is that if you are doing changes on state, F&A, or trust funds, this does not have to go to the budget office. Now, if you're changing on a grant, it will go to OSR. All right, so that won't change. It will have to go to OSR for approval. So if you are an approver, you're going to receive an email with a link, and that link will take you to your inbox in this retro tool. Okay, this is, listen now, this is not the inbox in Connect Carolina. You're going to go to that work list and you're going to look for these, and they're not going to be there. It's a different tool. Remember, they look different. They have different logins. Connect Carolina is just a nice and convenient place to put a link to this system. Okay, so these are two different inboxes, and they need to be monitored separately. If you are an originator and you're trying to figure out what's going on, once the approver approves the action, that retro is going to continue through the approval process. Once it is fully approved, so the very last person has signed off, including OSR on grants, then that will be written to Connect Carolina, and you'll be able to see it in InfoPort a day later. And you guys know there's a day lag time between information being entered in Connect Carolina and being visible in InfoPort. Should the approver reject the retro, the tool will notify the originator, and you can go in and make changes and then resubmit, and it will again begin along the approval path. Now, when you're looking in the tool, if the status is approved, that means all the levels have approved it, including OSR, and again, we're talking about grants there. Okay, so everybody's approved it. Once it is noted as completed, that means it's been approved and submitted into Connect Carolina. Okay, so once it's completed, you can expect that next day to see it in InfoPort. All right, can approvers see, here's some questions folks have had. Can approvers see all the actions they've approved? And yes, they can. So you can go in the Retro Funding Swap tool to see the actions you've approved. This is not visible in Connect Carolina. It's not visible in InfoPort, just in the Retro Funding Swap tool. Can originators see the retros they've originated? Yes, and again, you're going to see that in the Funding Swap tool, nowhere else. And you can also see where that retro stands in the approval process. So if there are 3 people who need to approve it and it's stuck on the second person, you'll know who to call, get on the horn and ask them to push the button and send it on. Approvers cannot make changes to the request. Okay, so if something needs to be changed, they will have to deny it and it'll push it back to the originator who will make the changes. All right, so a couple of things I want to make sure that you guys are aware of, our key takeaways. So the new tool is going to be used to do retros for payrolls run in Connect Carolina, okay? The Funding Swap ePAR is the tool that you will use for payrolls going forward, all right? So if you haven't paid it yet, then you can use the Funding Swap tool. So again, if you've got somebody, we're sitting here March 19th or 20th, whatever the date is, I think it's the 20th, and you need to pay a faculty member right now, you need to change his funding effective March 1st. You can still do that in the ePAR form because we have not ran payroll yet. But pay attention to those payroll lockout dates. All right. You're going to continue to do the Funding Swap ePAR form for retros on converted payroll. So anything July, August, September, you will use the Funding Swap to do retros on that. The funding sources option is temporary. So this retro tool is temporary. This is not permanent. We talked about what some of the long-term plans are, and that long-term solution is heading our way this fall. Now, you can go to CC Info and really find your one-stop shop for all things retro, including a nice table that has been put together that lets you can take a look at it and you can say, well, for my monthly employees, if they were paid during this pay period, and we're talking about salary, this is the tool I use. It's very handy, easy to understand. There's also a manual there for how to use the retro tool. OSR, I mentioned earlier, when you are submitting a retro, you do have to provide a justification for why you're doing the retro. OSR has given us some guidelines on making that selection. So you can find that on the OSR website. You can also find that in the one-stop shop for encumbrances and retros. All right, so you want to make sure you take a look at that because they are going to be looking at the justification. That's going to be very important for them as they approve these retros. There are step-by-step instructions on CC Info, so there's a nice manual that will walk you through what you need. If you do need help, you get in and you're kind of stuck and something doesn't feel right, you can't figure it out, whatever the case may be, you can contact the help desk and they will work your help ticket and help you get those issues resolved. All right, so I'm happy to take some questions now. We have, looks like we have about 45 minutes where we can take questions. We do have, again, Andy Johns in the room, who is the ABC for research. Robin Burke, who is on the commitment accounting team. So commitment accounting is a fancy Connect Carolina term for payroll and personnel. So Robin is here and can answer some questions. Deborah is going to begin reading the questions that have come to us in the chat room. So, shoot.
While you were on slide 15, we had a question that said, will it ever have the updates?
What updates are we referring to?
Well, that's where I was confused. That's why I was referring back to slide 15.
So I'm on slide 43 now. If you can quickly mention what slide 15 is, we'll come back to your question.
Okay. We have several questions from people who said they couldn't log in to the salary redistribution. When I hit login, it refreshes to the screen to the login again. Could this be a browser issue?
Shouldn't be a browser issue. The tool is developed and tested to work on multiple browsers. What I would say is that, again, we've already granted permissions to use the tool based upon who had access to the funding swap form. So if you do in fact know that you have access to the current funding swap form, and still are not able to log in, then what we'll need you to do is to submit a ticket, and we will try to troubleshoot that and figure out what's going on.
Okay. I am an approver. The only two options I had were approve or reopen. Am I supposed to have a reject button?
Reopen is the same as reject in this case. When you reject it, or when I should say when you reopen it, what it does is it requires that you as the reviewer leave a note explaining why you're reopening it. Reopen will then send it back to the originator, notifying them that you have sent it back to them and give them the note that you entered into the system. The reopen function, again, is labeled that because it's sending it back to the originator with the ability for them to then revise and resubmit.
All right, the next question. Will the Retro GL journal be deleted if not posted at month end like other GL journals? If not, what is the process?
So this is not tied in any way to the month or closing the month. If you submit a retro submission using this tool, again, once the terminal approval has occurred, meaning the last approval that's required, whether that be a level 2 approval or possibly an OSR approval, it's then posted to PeopleSoft that evening. So since this is outside of Connect Carolina does not know about the retro until it is posted. So if it happens to post the day before month end, great. If it doesn't, it'll post the first day of the following month. It will not be deleted.
All right, next question. If I make a mistake, can I retract the retro?
Unfortunately, we have not granted any ability for the originator to initiate a reopen themselves. What we've been advising people to do is to contact one of the downstream approvers and ask that they reopen the retro, which will again send it back to whoever originated it with that note.
All right, here's a lengthy question with some examples. I have a case where a charge to my suspense account appears to have been corrected in the payroll tab in InfoPort, but the correction does not show up in the transactions tab in InfoPort or in Connect Carolina. Can I do a retro swap to correct it in Connect Carolina and transactions? Which of these sources of data should be relied upon?
So this is probably a correction that was made on a student or an hourly temp because of low FTE or low budget in the department budget table. And those, again, that was corrected last week. And so for those, or last weekend. So that information was corrected in HR and is not yet visible in finance. So there was a slide where we kind of talked about that. But you should rely on what you're seeing in HR because most likely that is for a student or hourly person. It's in HR now, and by the end of the month they will have that pushed into finance so that you do see it on your transactions.
And just to add one more piece of clarifying information, those corrections that are being posted to the GL right now that you may already see also do show up in the retro tool. Those have been loaded because they're in HR. They show up in the retro tool, so you may see someone's payroll representation show as corrected within the retro entry, but you don't see that mirrored in the GL entry yet in InfoPort. So
let me clarify this too. So there are two types of corrections that have been made right now. There are the actual distributions where they kind of put it on the wrong chart field. That has been corrected, and you can see that now in InfoPort and in HR. The corrections to suspense because the student or the hourly temp hit there because of low budget or low FTE, that has been corrected in HR, but is not yet visible in finance. So there's kind of two different things that you might be seeing right now. So.
All right, I think this may be a continuation of questions, but I'll read it and you can tell me. For example, if the funding sources need to be corrected effective 7/1/2014, we will need to first submit an ECAR for the period of 7/1 to 9/30 using the Fund Swap ECAR. Then change the funding for each pay period starting 10/1 to 2/28. Then do another funding swap effective 3/1/2015. If so, do we need to insert a 10/1 funding grid when correcting the period 7/1 to 9/30?
So, not exactly. So let's talk about it. So you're talking about changing someone's funding effective July 1st. So what you need to do is log in to Connect Carolina and go to the Funding Swap ECAR. You want to submit a new, or enter a new grid. Okay, you want to do your retro effective 7/1 and put the correct information, what they should be paid 7/1 forward. Do that, you're done for in that EPAR. Then what you need to do is go into the retro tool, and for any payrolls 10/1 or later, so any payrolls that have happened in Connect Carolina, you will have to do that pay period by pay period, so by month or bi-weekly, depending on the type of person. So you will absolutely be in two places, but you don't have to submit multiple grids on that EPAR. Okay, on the EPAR, you do it 7/1. The system knows to take that information and to apply it going forward, and it basically knows it's not going to work for the information in the period October 1 and to what's been paid. So it'll pick it up. So you just do the one grid, effective 7/1, and then you will have to go in and do use the retro tool for the other pay periods. Okay, but for going forward, like you don't have to then go and submit another grid for April, May, and June. It'll just pick up the right information from the grid you do in July.
All right, next question. What happens if you close the funding source tool before you submit save?
The entry should be corrected once you begin making the first adjustment on a pay period. And so what I mean to say is that the very first adjustment that you make on a pay period for an employee is automatically saving the retro that you've begun. So if you close the browser by accident before you've submitted it, you should be able to log back in and see that in the View My Submissions section as an unsubmitted entry. If you do not see it as an unsubmitted entry, it means you didn't get far enough for the system to have saved it for the first time, and what you need to do at that point is reinitiate the entry for that person in pay period.
Okay. Next question. Nicole, when I review the HR funding transactions on the suspense source and funds that charge to finance, the HR totals look like it is overcorrected with a negative balance in HR totals. Do we need to let this all flush out by the end of the month? As you stated, all the items should be in finance by then?
Yes, all the items should be in finance by then. I'm trying to think why there would be an overstated HR.
For the suspense charges, right?
Are they talking about suspense? Let me see.
It says the suspense source and funds that charge to finance. The HR totals look like it is overcorrected with a negative balance in HR totals.
Like they took too much out of suspense.
And I can't find it.
Yeah, I can't either. I don't know. I mean, part of me says, yeah, I would wait until the end of the month and let all these things get processed so that, everybody's sort of talking to each other in the right way, the systems. And then if it still is showing an overcorrection in April, I would submit a health ticket and have somebody look at it. I mean, that's how I would handle it if I were in the department right now.
Okay, next question. Can you touch again on what happens to multi-year grants when a budget period ends?
Well, so if a project in PeopleSoft has an end date which lapses, in native sort of Connect Carolina world, and someone is scheduled to be paid from that source, when payroll runs, that person will get paid accurately, but the amount that was supposed to be charged to that source will be sent to suspense. Now, as soon as that posts, you're eligible to go in and do a retro on that amount that was sent to suspense. Again, we should be working to try to figure out why the multi-year grant date is what it is and see if we can't get that extended. But what I'll also say is that the retro tool would allow you to submit a retro on a project ID for which the date has passed, so long as that project ID has not been closed or inactivated. So if the retro is to move funds to a project ID whose end date has passed, it will still validate, it will still post, and that will go through successfully. But the original payroll is paid out of Connect Carolina in that situation described would be sent to suspense.
Okay, next question. Are salaries going to encumber on multi-year projects for the entire project period?
We're not encumbering salaries anymore at this point from HR side, and we're working on getting encumbrances cleared out on the finance side so that we can develop a custom solution by July 1st to take the budget period end date into account when calculating the penalties, so that we don't calculate them through the project end date. So all that's going to have to be addressed in the funding solution.
Okay, that's the last question we have so far. Any other questions? Oh, here, we just got a new one. If a retro has already been done and posted to finance in the new retro tool, when a person goes into the retro tool again for the same person and pay period, will the new chart field string distribution be shown?
Yes. Once you complete a retro in the new retro tool, and that retro makes its way all the way through to the completed stage, that signifies that that retro has actually been posted to Connect Carolina as a GL journal entry. At that point in time, you can go back in for that same person and pay period and initiate a new retro. And what you will see when you initiate that second retro is a representation of the net pay as it was most recently affected by the retro that was just completed. So if you added a new chart field during the first retro, you will see that same chart field and the amount distributed to that chart field when you go to the second retro.
Okay. Another question. After doing the retro to move it back to the grant, will it be moved by to the suspense? I think that must mean back to the suspense. After doing the retro to move it back to the grant, will it be moved back to the suspense if the sponsor has yet to, and it ends?
Right. So back to the same point. If the payroll was originally sent to suspense and one goes in to initiate a retro, even if that project ID end date is still passed, you can do the retro to move the salary to that project end date. Connect Carolina will not stop us from posting that to that project. However, keep in mind that in the situation you're describing, the OSR will also have to review that entry. If they deem that this retro is acceptable from the standpoint of allocability to the grant, then they will allow it to go forth even though the end date is passed. But they're going to be looking at it from the perspective of, is this an allocable expense to the project? Was the pay period that's being retroed still within the project period that was active, and things of that nature? But assuming the OSR approves it, Connect Carolina will not stop it from moving forward.
Okay, next question. If we've done retros in the retro tool, do we have to do a new EPAR effective 3/1 so all sources are correct going forward?
Yes, it does. If you want the correction to be effective for retro, then for the per pay period going forward, it does require two actions: the retro piece, use the retro tool, and then the EPAR to correct the current pay period.
Yeah, the retro tool is only going to affect pay periods which have actually been paid. So if you need to make a change to someone's source moving forward for pay periods which have not been paid, you do have to submit that EPAR in addition to the retro for the periods that have been paid.
That's the last question so far. Let's see if we have any other questions.
While we're waiting, I just want to go back and kind of point to this slide again. Make sure you guys, write this address down, the one-stop shop. Write this down, or go ahead and, if you've got double monitors, pull up CC Info so that you know you have an easy way to find the guides and the tools that have been provided to you guys. Okay, so again, CC Info, and it's the issues and fixes, encumbrances, and retro section. Lots of good information out there.
Right, we have a question. Are we still able to submit 3/1 EPARs now, or only 4/1?
You can do 3/1 if it's for a EPA person, because we haven't paid March payroll. But you would not be able to do it for your biweeklies who've already received pay in March. So until that payroll runs, you can do it.
We'll wait and see if any other questions come in.
I'm a talker. Like, the silence kills me. People out there who know me are nodding their heads.
It looks like a couple folks are writing, so we will monitor. Here's the next one. I have a retro that was reopened. I need to change the account number. When clicking on edit, the only thing I can change is the amount. Can you not change the account?
So to change the account, that's a new line. That is a different chart build stream. So you would need to add line at the bottom. You click on the bottom left corner, add line, and you would add a brand new chart build stream. It will be identical, except it will have a different account number.
All right, next question. What's the cutoff for biweekly?
Biweekly for EPARs?
Just
I assume that's the question.
We distributed through B18,
So anything B19 and going forward, you can still do an EPAR funding swap form. So B19 and forward, you can do the EPAR funding swap for biweeklies.
Okay, we have a couple comments here. I think the deadline for March EPA payroll has passed. We are past the department entry deadline for March monthly.
Okay, so then,
well, those are guidelines to ensure you have a good chance. But the fact is, we have not distributed March payroll and won't until next Thursday. March monthly payroll.
I'm sorry, it reminded me of Iverson and Cruz. Oh my God.
It's Friday, we're all punchy.
All right, any other questions? The payroll lockout date for monthly is March 24th.
well, there you go. You've got 3 more days. Thank you. Whoever said that, thanks for the information.
Will other examples be available on the website?
So on the website, there is a tool that says Guidance for Entering Salary Source Changes. It's a little table that you can look at. And, you know, that gives you the guidelines that you need, you know, where to use which tool. If you're looking for different examples beyond, like, which form to use, I'm not exactly sure what you mean. I mean, are you saying, let me just stop. I'm not entirely sure what you mean. But there is guidance on CC Info that walks you through based on whether they're biweekly or monthly, based on whether you're doing a regular salary or non-regular. It walks you through what type of form you need to submit.
All right, here's another question. If we've done a retro funding swap in EPAR for September, and these sources are the same ones that need to be in place for 1/15, do we have to submit an EPAR for 4/1/15, or will the sources from September carry forward?
The only way they'll carry forward is if they were no grids in between.
Right.
Or after 9/1. If there's anything in between, that, you know, stops at that point and makes that information.
Any other questions? Robin, could you repeat that closer to the mic? I think they couldn't hear you. So this is a question about if you've done a retro funding swap in EPAR for September, and these sources are the same ones that need to be in place 4/1, do we have to submit an EPAR for 4/1, or will the sources from September carry forward?
The only way they'll carry forward is if you don't have any grids in between 9/1 and 4/1 already out there. If you have grids in between, it just stops at that point.
So if you have a 9/1 grid and then you have an 11/1 grid, then that funding for 9/1 stops at 11/1. And then you would have to do one, you know, 11/1, and assuming there was nothing after 11/1, that would then go forward from 4/1 and beyond. So anytime there's a grid on the funding swap EPAR, that's a break in funding. That's a new funding distribution. So, but assuming September 1 is the only funding grid, then you would only have to do the one.
All right, any other questions?
Surely we've got more questions. It's got to be a more lively group than this on Friday. You don't want us telling more jokes or making snarky comments.
Where do we find the cutoff dates for monthly and biweekly?
That's on the payroll website. I mean, it's the same place it's been all along.
Yeah.
So, and I don't mean to be trite. I'm not sure exactly where that is, but
Oh, yeah, it's on payroll.
yeah, the payroll website has that.
And I'm sure it's in the HR community as well.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, looks like some folks are still writing. Okay, here's one. If we create an e-card for 4-1, will we have to use the retro system in May to change it again?
Yes. And you'd have to do that because that payroll would have ran. So that's why, because you do it for 4-1 and then April payroll runs. Now it's a payroll run in Connect Carolina, which needs to do a retro on a payroll run in Connect Carolina. You have to use the new retro tool.
All right, any other questions? I think we've got a couple that are being written. We can see a little thing pops up that tells us when you're writing something in the chat room, so we'll wait till we see.
We anxiously await your question
That's right.
on the edge of our seats. Joking aside, please feel free to ask anything. Don't hesitate. That's what we're here for.
And we've got a little bit of time left, so we'd love to hear from you. All right, quick comment. The biweekly and monthly schedule links in payroll only list the payroll lockouts, but not the campus submissions deadline. Pretty sure you can get that from the HR community. I'm pretty sure it's posted there. All right, any other questions? Someone says, I'm not sure I understand the question before last. I think that was about the e-card for 4-1. Is that the one that you mean? Or do you mean the one about the retro funding swap in September? Okay, yes, she said, so you mean the one about the 4-1.
So if you today enter today you need to change someone's pay effective April 1st. You will go into Connect Carolina and you will use the funding swap e-par form to enter a new grid with an April 1 effective date. The question was, well, what if I need to now change that information in May? So where do I change April's information? Do I do that in the e-par, the funding swap e-par, or do I do that in the new retro tool? And the answer is you now have to do that in the new retro tool, because the retro tool is for payrolls run in Connect Carolina. So by May, if you need to make a change, you are making a change to a payroll that has run in Connect Carolina. So you would have to do that retro in the retro tool.
All right, because I got it.
Yay!
All right. Question, did you say that we have to wait until a retro action in the new retro tool has to be in the completed state before we can submit the next retro action?
So just to be clear, retro submissions are unique to a specific person and pay period. When you initiate a retro submission for a person and pay period, that prevents you from doing another retro for that same person and pay period until the one that you've already initiated has made it all the way through and posted to Connect Carolina. So just to use an example, let's say I begin a retro submission for John Doe for the month of November. I submit it, it's in routing, it's sitting somewhere on campus waiting to be approved. I could then submit a second retro for John Doe for another month, another pay period, just not for the month of November, which is the one that's currently in process. Again, once the original one, the November in my example, makes it all the way to the completed state, that means that has been posted to Connect Carolina, and you can come back and submit another retro for John Doe for the month of November. But you can have as many retros in progress for as many people pay period combinations as you want, just not more than one for the same person and pay period.
Okay, next, per OSR additional guidance, it says DB, but something must be accomplished. within 90 days of when the error was discovered. What do we do if it is older than 90 days? Any additional justification will be required?
So we've recognized that there is a very high volume of retroactive adjustments that need to be processed because of the circumstances we're dealing with. A large portion of those are because of dollars that have been sent to suspense erroneously because of our project end date issues. You are correct that NIH guidelines require a letter of justification to be submitted for any retroactive salary adjustment for a pay period that's greater than 90 days from the time the submission is made. However, this is a unique set of circumstances, again, because of what we're dealing with, and we recognize the high volume that you all are going to be submitting, and that will likely need to be reviewed by the OSR. So we've partnered with the OSR as well as with internal audit and university council to review the NIH guidelines and try to implement a mechanism that collects the information that we need to review and process these in lieu of a letter of justification. So when you go to do a retroactive adjustment, you're asked for a reason code, which Nicole showed on the screenshot in the presentation. And in some circumstances, when a select reason code is selected, you may also be asked for the individual's role on that project. There are simply 2 drop-down boxes that have to be answered in those cases. That is all that is required. We're not asking for separate letters of justification to be sent to the OSR for these entries. This is sort of a temporary leniency measure that we granted because of the volume that we're dealing with, and we feel that this mechanism still allows us to remain compliant with federal regulations.
Okay, next. Do we have until the payroll lockout date to submit EPAR forms for March? The payroll site shows the payroll lockout date of March 23rd for LO9.
So let me answer what I think the answer is, and then y'all hop in if I'm wrong, right? So remember that whatever you enter in Andy's system, in the new retro tool, exists there. So if for some reason you got to change somebody, oh, you know what? I'm answering a finance question. I'm thinking something different. I'll stop now.
The lockout applies to EPARs that update the job data. And funding swaps only update the department budget table. So those do tend to make it through up until the day we distribute the payroll, which is the same day the payroll is confirmed, which is typically 3 days before it's paid. So I would say that you have up until Thursday, the 26th, to have it fully completed if it's just a funding change, a funding swap. But if it affects job data, that is definitely applicable to the payroll lockout on the Tuesday.
All right, next question. How do you do a retro fund swap for someone that is on leave without pay?
So, first of all, if they are currently on leave without pay, they are likely not receiving any new pay when payrolls are run. However, if the retro that you need to submit was for a person that was paid before they went on leave without pay, there's nothing preventing you from doing that. When you log into the retro tool, as long as the pay period you are trying to retro was paid after 10/1, you'll be able to select that individual, and then you'll be presented with a list of pay periods for which that person was paid. So they may be on leave without pay today, but if they were paid in November, you can do a retro on that person in that pay period.
All right, next question. Can we do retros back to September 2013?
Yes, and you would need the EPAR to do that.
Anything?
All the way through, September 30th of 2014. You can do it all the way through September 30, 2014 for monthly, or through September 7th, 2014 for biweekly.
So just again to clarify, any pay periods from June 1st, 2013 to September 30th, 2014 can be retroed via the EPAR.
July 1st, 2013, yeah.
Right, July 1st, 2013 to September 30th, 2014. But that is legacy converted data, which is why the EPAR form is required to complete those retros. The new retro tool is only for pay periods paid after October 1, 2014.
Okay, any additional questions? We've got a couple more minutes left, so if you have any additional questions, now's the time. Okay, this is a follow-up. The person that is on leave without pay effective 1/1/2015, can we still select his name to do the action?
Yes, he's still in the records. I mean, he doesn't, his payroll from the previous month didn't disappear. It's still there.
What about people who are no longer with UNC?
Does not matter. As long as they were paid a pay period, they'll be eligible for retro for the pay periods they were paid. You can still submit. They will be in there, even though they're no longer active.
All right, any additional questions? I see one person typing. No pressure or anything, you know, the person who's typing to get your question in. We're teasing. To understand, to change a salary source from 7/1/14, use PeopleSoft for 7/1/14 to 9/30/14, retro tool for October, November, December, etc., each month until March.
Yes.
All right, next question. Can I do a retro for the September 2014 payroll period that was paid out in October?
Yes, you can. In fact, we answer the question and speak to this very delicately because it's for pay periods that were paid after 10/1. So that means for biweekly payroll, the very first pay period that you can use the new retro tool for was pay period ending September 21st. And that was actually paid, I believe, on October 2nd. Third, excuse me. So that is the first pay period that you can actually retro using the new retro tool. Anything prior to that has to be done through the EPAR because it's legacy/converted data.
We have about 10 minutes left, but I don't see anyone typing. So we'll wait another minute or so and see if there's any last questions.
All right, people, it's been real, it's been fun, it's been real fun. So you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday as you are furiously entering retro after retro. Have a good one.